Thank you. Thank you. So before I worked at Netflix, one of the jobs I had was at a coding boot camp. And we would take people who had never written Hello World before, and over the course of 3 months of intensive study, turn them into fairly proficient junior programmers. And a little biased in how well we did, but I think we did pretty well at that. And I kept in contact with some of my students afterward. And one of them sent me a message about 6 months after he graduated. Now, this was one of my top students. He was amazing. He stayed late every day, wanting to learn more and more and more. The more new information I threw at him, the more questions he had. It was fantastic. And he contacted me 6 months later, and he said, "I think I made a mistake." I said, "All right, sounds good. Where do you want to hide the body?" No, not that kind of mistake. I think I picked the wrong career. It's like, wait, hold on a second. You just spent 3 months of intensive study where you loved it all. You landed your dream job. You have this fantastic team with good mentorship, challenging problems. I've heard nothing but great things about the work you've done. Why do you think you made a mistake in picking software engineering? And he told me, he said, we had a team lunch where the team had lunch, and the conversation came to the career plans of everyone there. Now, there are other juniors about, my proficiency skill level, and we also have all the way to seniors with over a decade of experience. And none of them were planning on staying in software engineering in the next year or so. I said, wait, so does everyone on your team hate coding? I mean, I understand, I hate coding myself sometimes, but most of the time I actually enjoy what I do. He said, no, they all loved it. They all actually were rather upset that they'd have to leave. I said, well, why on earth would an entire team of quite competent people think, well, that's it for software engineering? He said, well, they all liked it, but they all thought the only way to progress in their careers was to, and say it with me, go into management. Now, I'm not going to stand up in front of a bunch of managers and say that no one should go into management, but I think we can all agree that it shouldn't be mandatory. No one wants to take an excellent software engineer and turn them into a rather mediocre manager because that's the only way to move them up. We as an industry have really kind of failed at setting a career path, of setting some way of getting better, a destination for engineers that doesn't require people to go do something other than software engineering. And so this all boils down to one question in my head. What does senior mean, after all? I mean, this is in the context of senior software engineer. Does it perhaps mean a person who wears silly hats? I hope so. So I was curious, what do we mean when we say senior software engineers? And so I asked around a bunch of friends, said, what's your response? What do you think the qualities of a senior engineer are? And the first thing I think of myself is when I was a much younger developer, and I had about 10 months of experience. And I was interviewing around, trying to get out of an absolutely horrid startup, and I got an offer. Woo! It was for a senior software engineering position at, of course, 10 months of experience. And it turns out it was with a consulting company, and they could charge more for senior engineers. So surprise, all of their engineers were senior. Fortunately, I didn't take that job, but it leads to kind of the first definition of senior that I've seen, expensive. Hello, I'm Randall Kotnick. I'm an expensive software engineer. The next thing I hear a lot is people who say, I've been an engineer for 5, 10, 15 years. I have done so many incredible things, and I'm not sure where to go next. I could pick up yet another programming language and stave off boredom for another maybe year, but I'm not sure where to go in software. So the second definition I heard from people was bored. The most popular, unfortunately, answer I received was that a senior software engineer was whichever software engineer in the room had the most opinions, which is not good. But my favorite of all of the answers I received to this question was from Minnesota. Minnesota is a state in the United States where, we got one person from Minnesota, where title inflation has gotten so out of hand that once you graduate from college with a degree, you're offered a senior engineering position. That's considered entry level. And then once you do some work as a senior engineer, you're promoted to senior architect. No mid-level architects there, just senior ones. And once you finish a whole bunch of study as a senior architect, you're then promoted again to senior fellow. Whatever that means. So we don't really know what a senior is, but the one thing I think we all can agree on that most people define seniority by is years of experience, which, as far as quantifiers go, I think years of experience is actually worse than from Minnesota as a definition. Because have you ever gone to your boss and said, well, I've done all this work and I've helped with these projects and I think I'm ready for a promotion or a raise, and they say, well, you have a lot of experience, and it turns out the number of years required for that promotion is however many you have plus one. So we keep using that word. What should senior mean? What can we do to define that kind of apex of the software engineering career path? When we talk about junior engineer, mid-level engineer, senior engineer, we're talking about where people are on a career path, I hope. And when we talk about senior, that's the end. That's where everyone wants to go. And if where you want to go isn't well defined, then your career path is kind of rubbish. So the problem with senior is not that we don't have enough definitions, but rather we have too many definitions. So instead, I think we should have new words to talk about this career path. These words need to be quantifiable. We need to use them, and when we talk about this, we need to talk about where we are. Because so many people are like, well, I guess I'm a senior because that's the title I have, and they have no better way of establishing where they are in their path. Years of experience sort of provides this, but 1 year at a startup is vastly different than 1 year at a massive corporation. Secondly, these words need to establish where we're going. After all, it's a path. Years of experience also provides this in the absolute worst possible way. Because in order to progress, to move forward in your career, if years of experience is the metric you're using, you need to continue existing. And that's it. Raise your hand if you think that a poster with a picture of a kitten on it and the caption, "Continue existing," would raise morale around the office. Ooh. I don't know if that's an indication of just how low morale is at the office, or your office really likes kittens. Everyone likes kittens. For those of you who follow me on the internet, I'm actually known as Some Kittens on the internet, and we don't like you. All right, so finally, as the third metric, we need to describe the work we do. For those of you who've been around for a while, you know that a junior engineer is going to do fundamentally different work than a senior engineer, but from the word junior and senior, you wouldn't know that. Which raises another interesting question. What work do we do? Physics tells us that work is, applying pressure through a distance, and technically I have a very fancy keyboard that lets me do that, but I don't think that's quite work. What we have here at the top is a problem. It is a very long, round problem with rounded corners. We all start with one big problem we want to tackle, not just at the engineer level, but the company level too. At Netflix, our big problem is when our customers go home at the end of the day and they flop down on the couch, and then they say, what do I want to do tonight? We want the answer to be Netflix. Not Amazon Prime, not HBO Go, or heaven forbid, broadcast television. But Netflix. And you can't write a function, even in Python, I know, to stream amazing content to over 100 million customers. So we need to break that problem down into its component parts. And as part of that, we need the streams to not only be fast, but also reliable, because if Netflix is down, no one is going to watch Netflix. So we need a comprehensive monitoring and alerting platform as part of that. Still can't write a function. Break it down further. As part of that, we need an intuitive UI for people at Netflix, other engineers, to tell the monitoring and alerting team what wrong is for their service. Maybe 100% CPU is a huge problem, or maybe you're a batch job, and that's perfectly normal. And that's what I do in my day job, is I have that UI, and that's my big problem. How do I build this UI? And when I take that problem and I break it down, and I break it down, and I do user interviews, and I write code, and I try to build something, until I've broken it down into a problem the size of, say, how do I put a text box on the page that lets the user enter a percentage amount? Now that I can write a function for, even in JavaScript. And so now we've broken down the problem enough that we can actually have code to do it. We don't have code yet. What we have is essentially a specification. These are solutions. We have now solved the problem and just need to write code, which is the final step. We need to implement that code. Remember that thing we do. So you'll notice that all of these problems and solutions are different shapes, because not all problems are the same. There are different sizes, and there are different shapes of problems. So if you've ever heard the expression, does this person have 10 years of experience, or 1 year of experience repeated 10 times, we now know what they mean. Because the happy face here has 10 years of experience. They have solved all sorts of differently shaped problems. They have tackled things from, say, putting a small microcontroller on a shipping container that needs to survive the Pacific, to dealing with massive things in the cloud. The unhappy engineer here has dealt with square-shaped problems. It might be pretty good with square-shaped problems, I'd hope so. But if you give them any other shape of problem, well, they're not going to do too well. So with all that in mind, I've talked a lot about words. Let's actually get to the words. These are how I would describe an engineer career path. We start off, instead of junior, with solution implementer. Instead of mid-level, problem solver. And instead of senior, that final step on this path, we talk about problem finders. And that sounds really corporate-y. So let's talk about it a little more in detail. The solution implementer, and this is actually the student who inspired the story at the beginning at Rocket U. Solution implementer is a beginner. They need to learn the basics. And so, as a leader responsible for solution implementers, your job is to take that bottom row. Problems that have been broken down so much, they become solutions, things you only need to write a function for to solve. And your job is to give them these solutions and let them write code, so they can learn how to turn solutions into code. And then your job, after they have finished this, is to review them. Say, this is why this problem was picked. This is why this solution was chosen for that problem. And review the code of, this is how you chose to solve it. Is it good? Is it bad? After that, once they've seen, not just implemented a lot, but rather implemented a lot of different shapes. So they've seen kind of the whole breadth of what your company does. We can have them kneel and tap the magic wand of tech leadership and say, all rise, problem solver. Now, a problem solver takes the problems, obviously, and solves them, using a metaphorical pickaxe, though if you want to use a literal one, you can. I don't recommend it. They take these problems and they break them down into smaller problems until they get to solutions, and then implement them. Put the implementations back together, and surprise, you've solved the original problem. When you have an implementer who is promoted to solver, at first you want to give them very small problems. They can break them down, maybe the first level. So they break them down directly into codable solutions, write code, etc. But that's not the end state. You want these people to get better at their job, of course. And then you give them another problem, and another one, until you can give them bigger and bigger and bigger problems that require more and more breaking down because they have seen such a breadth of differently shaped problems. And as they get to these stages, they grow bigger and bigger and bigger and get bigger and bigger problems, you need to start letting go of the reins. You need to start backing off and saying, all right, well, here's the problem. It is your job to solve it. Don't micromanage. And as they grow, they'll solve bigger until you can say, oh, here's a new feature that we have kind of a vague idea of how it should work. But I trust you to take this huge, vague problem, and break it down. But that's not the end. The vast majority of engineers today are problem solvers, but it doesn't have to be terminal. Because one final layer, the problem finder. As someone saw, a problem solver solves bigger and bigger problems. You give them more and more autonomy. The problem finder is given complete autonomy. Instead of giving them tasks, you give them context. This is why our company exists. This is why this application exists. This is why our team exists. They take that context, this understanding of what the goal is, look at the app, and find a lot of problems. Because it's easy to find problems, but the specialty of the problem finder is prioritization. Not only can they find them, they understand in the context why those problems exist. Maybe this bit of technical debt, it's fine. We can leave it there because we have higher priorities. Then once the problem is found that the problem finder wants to tackle, they also break it down into smaller problems. And finally, also implement them, because at no point should we stop telling software engineers to engineer software. You could think of this like a step pyramid, or perhaps I just really like pyramids, where at the bottom of the pyramid we have the implementation of software. And if you can't implement software, you're not going to be a very good software engineer. As we learn and get better at that, we can expand that base until finally it's big enough to hold the next level, the problem solver. Expand and build that one, as well as the implementation, until we finally get to that problem-finding third level. And you're not done. It's not suddenly you're a problem finder, and therefore you can never learn anything new again. But instead, you have all three of these levels of the pyramid to learn and grow on. So with this new context in mind for building a career path for software developers, we can talk about where we go wrong as an industry. The first one is when your pyramid gets a little bit misshapen. And you've become a finder, and you learn and find all of these great problems, but you never actually solve them, or, heaven forbid, write code. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this anti-pattern is called a software architect. On a more serious note, one of the biggest problems I've seen, especially leading a boot camp and watching a whole bunch of new engineers encounter the industry, is companies who think that beginners, implementers, are really just cheap problem solvers. And they just throw problems at them, walk away, and never actually teach them how to do the work they are expected to do. I hear a lot from companies like, oh, we don't hire juniors. They never work out. I understand if you have some problems hiring and you don't have a 100% success rate, but if no juniors ever work out at your company, that's not the fault of the juniors. Let me repeat that. You need to mentor juniors, or it is your fault that they are failing. I'm not going to say any more on this because we already had an excellent presentation on how mentorship really works before lunch. We have to get to my personal love-to-hate anti-pattern of this industry, the UI squeeze. Do we have any UI engineers out there? Or people who lead UI? Few, okay. Huh. I had an absolutely terrible startup experience. One of the problems there was all of the product managers would go into a meeting room, sit down, and just decide what we were going to do for the next 2 weeks. They would churn out reams and reams of tickets on our ticketing system and hand them all over to the designers. And the designers would take them and say, all right, well, the app needs to do this, I'll design this and add this button, and it's great. And then they'd hand it off to the UI engineers. Now, we had titles like mid-level software engineer, senior software engineer, but we weren't doing that work. We were implementing. We were just taking, all right, well, they want a button. When you click the button, it makes that call. OK, fine. And they wondered why they had such a high turnover rate. Because they're hiring what they thought, we only hire the best, and then we're going to go put them in doing beginner work. Now, when a beginner entered that environment, it did very well until they learned how to do things, and then they were also bored. The answer here is not to stop doing UI engineering, but instead bring the engineers back to the front, that one initial meeting where all the product managers would meet together, and give the engineers autonomy and say, this is where we want to go. We have these problems, but you need to solve them. And allow autonomy. And the first thing you're going to hear from them is we have an enormous load of tech debt because you haven't been listening to us. Finally, this was mentioned earlier as well, we have imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is where someone is put into a position of seniority or leadership and feels like they don't deserve to be there. Now, if we say, congratulations, you're a senior software engineer, and at no point have we ever talked about what a senior software engineer is, other than perhaps opinionated and expensive, then it gets really easy for that person in their brain to go, well, I don't know, I don't feel like a senior. Has anyone out there been promoted and didn't feel like a senior? So if we take these words and we start being descriptive about the work people do and say, of course you're a problem finder. You've done amazing work over the last few months. You found this problem, and you're able to help all these other people out with it, break it down for them. It helps so much in the mind of an engineer who is going, well, I'm wrong all the time because all the errors always pop up, and to settle their mind and say, all right, maybe I am on the right course. So to sum up with a story, I used to work at a company called Norse, and now you know where I got the helmet. And what Norse did is what we called cybersecurity threat intelligence, which is a big fancy way of saying we opened attachments on emails from people we didn't know. But then took notes on what happened. And we had a bunch of fantastic incoming streams. So we had the malware people who were opening all sorts of things and seeing what happens. And we had the email people who actually would take in all of the email and web crawlers and all sorts of fun things. But if you've heard of Conway's Law, you can understand why every team had their own silo. We do malware here. We don't handle email. We do email here. We don't handle malware. And none of the teams had ever talked to each other. This is a problem. And my boss at the time was acting as a problem finder and saw that. Said, all right, it's a problem that no one's talking to each other. As a context, we'd be a lot better if someone could take an email attachment and actually just send it to the send it to the malware team, and automatically, rather than a bunch of squabbling happening in the middle. So he broke that down, and he handed it over to me. I was the tech lead. He said, I need you to build a stream processing system to take all of the incoming data and send it around so the silos can be broken down. I said, sounds good. What's a stream processing system? And then we took that, broke it down further, because I had a bunch of reports at all different skill levels. And my job as a technical lead, because we are here for learning about how to be technical leads, was to take that and break it down to the level I thought each one of my people could handle. And then I bumped it up a little bit, because I like challenging them. And they were amazing people. So I took that. Well, some of them were implementers, and I had to actually write out what the software should do for them. But others were problem solvers, and I could give them bigger, weightier problems and trust them to come back to me. All right, well, I've solved this, but I have this other problem, and work that out. And we did. We took that, put that all together, and in about a month, had a Kafka-based stream processing system. And then the company collapsed, but that's another story. But that's how I think it should work. That people are challenged to take on the work that they're ready for, be it just writing code, or building, solving problems, or tackling and finding and prioritizing the biggest problems at all. Thank you.